Hello students, this is Dr. Newmark and this is your week 11 highlights video. So let's jump right in. We're going to talk about the first two chapters of Don Norman's The Design of Everyday Things. I hope you found this book to be really interesting. I understand that parts of it were rather dense because it does contend with issues of engineering design, product design, psychology, business practices, lots of factors that come together to inform how we design content, whether that's written content or product design, in user-oriented fashions. So chapter 1 started out with two very clear concepts concerning good design. Their discoverability and understanding. So these can be posed in this way. How do I understand what actions are possible with a certain product, for example? And how is the product supposed to be used? Have you ever sort of consciously asked yourself these questions when faced with a product that's brand new to you, perhaps a website or an app, or an actual material thing? In the chapter, he provides an example of like a very frustratingly designed coffee pot. I think it's called like the coffee pot for masochists or something like that, where you would have to touch it right underneath the spout holding the handle, and of course you couldn't pour it in that way. It's not the coffee pot that's shown on the screen right now, but if you look in the book you'll see an image that I'm describing. So if you looked at that, you might ask yourself, can I discover what's possible with this discoverability? And how is this supposed to be used? Because I'm not sure I understand it properly, because if I use it the way I think I'm supposed to, I would burn myself. So that's just a kind of extreme and exaggerated visual example that is intended to get you to think about these questions. So I want you to think about this. Do problems in use usually originate with the machine or with the human? If we're thinking about human-centered design, the answer is probably not the human, right? They originate in the design of the machine or the utility or whatever it is that you're exploring. So a disaster like the 3 Mile Island disaster teaches us what about humans as users of technology? Go back and make sure that you have a good understanding of that example. He, in fact, was a consultant brought in the aftermath of that disaster, which was with a nuclear reactor facility. And many of you probably weren't alive when that happened. It's been, 35 years, maybe longer since that happened. I don't remember the exact date, but look it up and think about how the issue that emerged with that, that close to nuclear catastrophe, it didn't end up melting down in a way that released any radiation, but what it tells us about people having to avoid disasters through the interface between humans and technology. And what did Don Norman take away from his assessment of the situation as a consultant? So another important principle from that chapter, chapter 1, is that we must design for the way people really are, not for the way that we wish they were. Many times, let's say folks who work in technology, and there are examples in the book about this, get really frustrated with users not being able to engage with their technologies in the way that they designed them. And the frustration coming out of the fact that they think that it's a human failing, that they aren't able to use a utility, a tool, an app in the way that they think is very obvious for it to be used. Now, human-centered design is an attempt to address this, meeting people where they are, addressing design questions based on the way people really are and the way that they use things in real life. So for technical communicators like us, there's a huge role for communication in human-centered design. So I want you to think about that through all of this. Next, I want us to return to the concept of discoverability. And Norman explains that it results from applying 5 psychological concepts: affordances, signifiers, constraints, mapping, and feedback. So an affordance is what the object is for. And he uses the example of a chair. A chair you can easily move around and you can sit your bottom in it, right? It's for sitting. A chair is for sitting. So a signifier is what then? He does refer to the realm of semiotics. When I teach the visual rhetoric class, I talk about semiotics and the role of the signifier. The way that he's using it here is slightly different. He's using it as related to the concept of signaling. So if something signifies a behavior, it signals what you should do with it. So it could be flashing on a screen, or something highlighted so that you're supposed to engage with it in a certain way. So he talks about touch screens. So a touch screen has an affordance of being able to be touched, right? But it signals your use. The use is signified by something looking like you can click it. So it creates that response from the person engaging with it. He also introduces concepts of the what and the where. Next are examples of valuable clues you might use to solve problems with something you interact with, like a sink. In his example, he talks about not being able to drain a sink in a British hotel room. He didn't know that you have to stick your hand into the sink and depress the stopper to get it to bounce back up again so that the sink drains. He thought that was really terrible design. I had a similar experience when I turned on a tub faucet in a foreign hotel, and I didn't understand that I had to pull this little valve from the faucet down in order for the shower to start emitting water. So those aren't necessarily incidences where valuable clues were shared with the user so that they could solve the next problem. So what is an example of mapping that you've encountered in your life, or feedback? Sometimes if you press and often these are for universal design for learning or accessibility, that when you press something, a noise emits, like a crosswalk. If you press the button to cross, a beeping sound starts occurring. That's not only for users who are deaf or of low hearing, but it's also to give you feedback that something's happened after you press the button. The example of mapping that he gives is seat adjustment buttons on a car door that basically look like the seat. So that maps it for you. Okay, so what are, and this is from the second chapter you read, the gulf of execution, when you ask, how does this operate? And the gulf of evaluation. What happened? What happened when I just did something? So Norman explains in what is actually a pretty dense chapter, the 7-stage action cycle as a means of understanding human action and guiding design. Now we're really getting into the psychology of use of products. So we have goal, plan, specify, perform, perceive, interpret, and compare. It is crucial for someone working in the landscape of usability testing to understand the psychology of users, how they engage with design, to go from goal all the way through performing, clear through to comparing. So how does a knowledge of our cognitive and emotional levels of processing, visceral, behavioral, and reflective, help us to understand human behavior? And ask yourself, why would understanding human behavior help somebody involved in the landscape of usability testing? I hope you come out on the other side of that, understanding how important it actually is. So there's a relationship between the 7 stages of action and the 7 fundamental principles of design. Those principles are on pages 72 and 3 of your book, so be sure that you have looked at those. Now, before I finish this video, I want to quickly turn to the assignment because there's a few things that are really important for you to hear from me about it. This is the first chunk of the assignment that gives you an overview of what you're doing. All groups are going to test a particular tool within Adobe's Creative Cloud Express. So in this assignment, you're going to work with a group of classmates to do all of these bullet points. You need to come up with a discrete task to test. You need to follow guidelines from the course to come up with a testable set of actions that are defined. You're not going to be too broad. You're going to be as precise as you can. Now, the thing that I really wanted to address in this video is that you need to select, based on research of all of the sorts of people who use Creative Cloud Express, a subgroup, a subpopulation. Let's say it's first-year students at UNM who come from Albuquerque area high schools who are women, or senior citizen users who are between the ages of 70 and 75. So going back to some of Norman's lessons, if you do come up with a specific population to test, you need to be very careful in analyzing your findings, that let's say it's a group of senior citizen users between the ages of 70 and 75, that maybe they struggle with certain things, a certain thing you're having them test in Creative Cloud Express, but it's imperative that you don't formulate those problems as problems with the user. It's not, so to speak, that these users are old necessarily. It's that the affordances of the utility haven't been designed with them in mind. And if you were going to direct your findings to Adobe, you might be helping them to learn about how they could change the tool to better serve a certain demographic or population, right? So that's why it's so important for you to come up with a specific group that you're testing that is definable in a certain way, because that then would help your client, let's say it was Adobe, or if you were using these skills later in your career for a different client, to better serve that user population. So I really wanted to dwell on that third bullet point. You need to come up with your testing group very concisely. Next, the following bullet points are pretty easy to understand. I'm just telling you what you need to do next. Then here's exactly what you need to produce. Individually, you're going to write a memo that has all of these 6 facets to it. And then as a group, you are going to have produced the things that I described prior in the assignment. But there is an individual component, and that's a really important component, and it is the memo. So the deliverables will be submitted to me in a single PDF plus a web link. So make sure that you are on top of what all of those are. And here is a structure of the grading. When I submit to you at the time of me releasing the grade back to you, it'll be in the form of a spreadsheet like your other assignments, and there will be subcomponents to all of these numerical values, but this is the basic overall structure. And finally, here is Creative Cloud Express. I want you to get pretty familiar with it. It's open access. It's not proprietary in the sense that you have to have a license to use it like you do with the other aspects of the Creative Cloud that you get access to because you're a UNM student. Creative Cloud Express is open to everybody. It's intended to compete with Canva. And so that is why if you, for example, had a group of users that was 3rd graders, it would be free for them to use, or senior citizens between the ages of 70 and 75. So anyone can access this. All right, on that note, I'm going to bring this long video to a close. So keep on working with your group mates, and I will see you in next week's video.